Welcome to our continuing series of Virtual Voices, focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for your letters and questions. We appreciate receiving them. Our speaker today is going to be Mr. Robert Swan, who is the first person to have walked to both the North and South Poles, which is impossible at the present time. Over to you, Mr. Swan.
Well, thank you so much. Well, wonderful to be with you all. And I'm going to share some photographs with you. I hope you can see that picture of me there. I'm going to talk today about what's possible to achieve together. And this dream of mine to walk to both poles began when I was 11. You can see last time I was properly dressed in this photograph. And I watched a film. And that film was about the real explorers who went to the South and North Pole. And I thought, I'm going to do this thing. And everybody laughed at me, and they still laugh at me. But guess what? In between, we achieved that mission of going to both poles. Now, this cost, when I was 23, some of you are possibly that age, I had to raise $5 million over 30 years ago to undertake this expedition. And I thought I could raise the money in 2 weeks, but actually it took me 7 years of my life to raise the money. And I lived in this old warehouse in the East End of London on the River Thames. I worked as a taxi driver on the streets of London. My family talked in terms of counselling and psychiatric help. They still do, but they did a bit more then. But you know something? If you hold on to a dream, listen to why people tell you no, eventually you will get a yes. And after 7 years of fundraising, we bought our little ship, Southern Quest, and we set sail for the Antarctic. 25 people, no one was paid, all volunteers, went past Africa, across to Australia, and then south from Lyttelton in New Zealand. We headed literally off the map. And I was thinking, great, you know, why didn't we go to the Bahamas or somewhere a bit more sensible? Suddenly ice coats the ship and the reality of Antarctica sets in. Antarctica, my friends, is the only place in the world that we all own. No one owns Antarctica, we do. But looking at the scale of it, it's a gigantic, massive continent, such a special place. 5 of us are now left alone in Antarctica. You've got to imagine, young people listening, that there was no connectivity. There were no mobile phones. There were no satellite phones. So imagine the day when you watch your little ship head north back to New Zealand, and 5 of you are left alone in Antarctica, no communications with the outside world for a year. We won't know what's happening, and we just hope that we'll reach the pole and our ship will return to the edge of Antarctica to collect us. Now, 5 of us, very lonely, 3,000 miles from civilization, go into our tiny little home and we wait. Many of us have been battling a bit with isolation over the last year and a half. Well, imagine being trapped for 9 months with 4 people who don't like you and you don't like them. And I chose very, very different, strong characters to be on this expedition. I didn't choose my best friends. I chose the right people to undertake this mission, and very different characters. We came through 9.5 months in this hut, just remembering some simple tools to deal with isolation. First, be funny. Humor will always dispel moments of tension between you. Tell each other the truth if you can. Listen to what people are really saying to you. Don't listen to what you want to hear. So we came through 9.5 months in that tent. Very hard time, but then 3 of us laid out our equipment on the edge of the Antarctic, and now we head south. Imagine no radio, no GPS, nothing. We're going to navigate to one building 900 miles away using the sun, a sextant, and this old watch. Any mistakes now, we don't come home. This would be the longest unassisted march ever made anywhere on Earth in history. And everybody said, you're going to die. We just knew we'd get thin. And I would lose 68 pounds in body weight in 70 days. So thin we would get. So off we go, just 3 of us, no backup, no communications, each sledge, 80 days of food and fuel, off we go. We have to cross these terribly dangerous things called the crevasse. And if that bridge of snow breaks, you go in, you die. And we had no rescue equipment. And we truly, in a world that loses trust every day, I feel, trust is such an important thing. And I tell you what, we had it. We had to have it. We trusted each other's judgment. Past the crevasse zone, we got 350 miles to go now to the pole. And we're standing, think about this, in an area the size of the United States of America. And we are the only people there. Bit lonely. And if you fall over, twist an ankle, break a leg now, you're left to die. And beneath our feet, in this photograph, 16,000 feet of ice, 90% of all the world's ice, we're standing on it in this picture. 70% of all the world's fresh water, we're standing on it. And please remember this, that if we continue, I repeat, continue to melt this, we are going to swim on planet Earth. If we melted Antarctica, the sea level around the world would rise an estimated 400 to 500 feet. We're now closing in on the South Pole. We don't know if this is happening. Remember, we don't have any communications. Our little ship has returned from Christchurch, New Zealand, and should be at our base camp. They should be unloading a little aeroplane, which will fly to the South Pole to look for us. If they find us, we jump on the plane, go back to the base and do something that we promised to do. Remember that young chap, age 23, trying to raise the money to walk to the South Pole and no one would listen to me? Well, I was really lucky to be supported by the great Jacques Cousteau from France. If you don't know who I'm talking about, you should find out. He was possibly one of the first people to really talk about the protection of our planet, especially the oceans. And he befriended me, we became great friends. And he said, Rob, I will give you some credibility. I think you need some. But in return, you must leave Antarctica clean and tidy. Take away all of your equipment, all of your rubbish, just leave your footsteps in the snow. And I said, yep, we'll do that. Last few miles to the South Pole, think about it. If we'd made one mistake in calculation, we could have missed the South Pole by 40, 50, 100 miles. Arrived there, where's the pole? 2 days left of food, we would have died. But I was with the best. Roger and Gareth, incredible people, navigated us 300 yards off course. That is the South Geographic Pole Scientific Station. And we stood there and we're so proud of what we'd achieved, not just us, but the whole team. And as we stood there celebrating, the base commander from the South Pole Station came out, looked at me and said, Rob, I can't believe I'm telling you this. Your ship sank 5 minutes ago. Frankly, that's just the sort of thing you want to hear when you've walked 900 miles to the pole, spoken to no one for a year, that your ship sank 5 minutes before you arrived. Most important thing, everybody's safe. But I've now got a problem standing at the pole. We had made a commitment to Jacques Cousteau to remove our equipment. No ship. 60 tons of equipment on the shores of the Antarctic. I'm bankrupt. No ship. 3,000 miles to New Zealand. But we had something much more valuable, a great team. And we made a commitment. And I think in this world, you should deliver on your word. And it took an extra year of our lives. People stuck in the Antarctic for another year. No one's ever paid. But eventually I got another ship in, loaded up our equipment, and did what we said we were going to do, left Antarctica tidy. Now, something happened to me that brought me to speak to you today. Walking to the pole, my eyes changed color in 70 days through damage. My face, our faces blistered out, the skin ripped away, and we didn't know why. But when we got home, we were told by NASA that we'd walked under, yes, wait for it, the hole in the ozone layer the month it was discovered. And our faces were ripped away, our eyes damaged by the excessive ultraviolet rays that hit us. Now, I didn't know this thing was there. And I came away from this thinking, maybe our survival on this planet. Now, remember, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not an explorer. There are lots of great people before me. And I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not qualified. And I'm too stupid to be a scientist. But what you're looking at here is somebody that's really good at staying alive. I'm a survivor. I'm a good person to be in a tight spot. And a survivor doesn't look at things like this and say, oh, well, let's think about it another time. A survivor stays alive by acting immediately. And I thought to myself, I've got to do something about this. I've got to be part of this in some way, very much in a positive way. And that was the decision. And I also looked at our world, and I've always been a huge fan of the United Nations. So I approached the United Nations for our North Pole expedition and met with some fantastic people, Perez de Cuellar, who was the head of the UN, Dr. Mustafa Tolba, who was one of the founders of the United Nations Environment Programme, a fantastic gentleman, Federico Mayor from UNESCO. And I said, look, why don't we go to the pole and help celebrate the United Nations? So off we go now north. This time you're going to walk for 700 miles, every step away from land, into the middle of the fearsome, terrible Arctic Ocean. So every step you take to the North Pole is away from land into the middle of an ocean. 8 of us, 7 nations, truly celebrating the United Nations. Off we go. Walking to the pole is really hard physical work, desperate in fact, and very, very tiring. You can see the conditions that we had to face. Very, very hard, pulling those sledges 9 hours a day, 7 days a week for 70 days, sorry, 56 days in a row. And this would be our home on the surface of the ocean. And our nightmare was what happened if the ice split and the tent went in the middle of the night and then the ice closed. Well, that was in our dreams. And inside our tent, we had to learn patience. 8 of us, 7 different nations. And look on the right, Daryl from Harlem, New York City. He would become the first American to walk to the North Pole. But look how much he really enjoyed Rupert's music, not much. Huge test of patience. All these people pushed in. Here's me coming in. You must wash your skin on these journeys. If you don't wash your skin, you get body sores. And here's me coming in naked, washing at minus in Celsius, about minus 71. If anybody ever says to you, I'm cold, if they look like this, I promise you they are. So we are now 642 miles away from land in the middle of an ocean. And we're 100 miles out from the pole. We're nearly there. And then the only thing we hadn't planned for happened 30 years ago. The ice started to break and move, twist and turn. And then 4 days later, the entire ocean broke up under our feet. Now, please remember, this is way before rescue. no communications. We just have one thing in our sleds, and that's a little beacon that when we reach the North Pole, we'll set the beacon off, and hopefully a little plane will come and collect us. But you can't land a plane in the middle of this. And in 20 hours of trying to go north, we're being forced south. We're going to die, and I can't see the solution. But eventually, with our Japanese companion, we threw away our watches. He came up with a brilliant idea that it was always daylight at the North Pole, so we could run 40-hour days. Think about that, to go faster across this ice. Can we make it? Daryl, our brave American, he loses his heel, drops off his foot, 115 out, desperate battle. And 10 miles from the pole, we have a bit of luck, and the wind changes direction, the ice comes together, and after a huge struggle, we reached the pole, 8 of us, 7 different nations, flying a flag we were all proud to represent. And that flag was given to us at the UN building in New York City by the then Director General, Perez de Cuellar. So we were proud to fly that flag. We had done this, not me. And yes, on this day, I did become the first person to walk to both poles, but that was pretty irrelevant. Let me tell you something, that 30 years on, you cannot any longer walk to the North Pole. There is no ice. So in 30 years, it's gone from a bit of a struggle to get there to you can't do it anymore. We should listen to that. Returned home, and maybe some of you might recognize Jacques Cousteau now, hauled in to go and see him. And he said, Rob, you must come to the very first Earth Summit in 1992 on the environment, and I look forward to seeing you there. So I went. It was an extraordinary first, you know. Often things that happen first, you know, are hard to pull together. And this was the first time that the world leaders had ever got together under the United Nations on the whole issue of our Earth, our environment, 1992. And after the first Earth Summit, Jacques Cousteau gave me 30 years ago a 50-year mission. He said, Rob, in the year 2041, the treaty that holds Antarctica together and doesn't allow any exploitation, we could be foolish enough to stop that, throw it away. So Rob, could you go out and make sure that we have the sense to leave Antarctica alone as a natural reserve land for science and peace? Well, I couldn't really say no. We've been working 30 years on that. And even my maths tells me that we've got 20 years to go. How have we done this? Well, first, it's important to involve people of your age. I know there's a lot of young people listening, and we went to Antarctica just after that first Earth Summit, taking lots of young people. I think this expedition was 25, 30 people from 15 different nations. And I like practical things. You know, there's so many words in this world. I think to inspire people as best you can, you should show people, not tell them. So we went down and took on it. I think the worst thing I've ever done, certainly the hardest thing I've ever done, which was the removal of 1,500 tons of twisted metal left at the former Soviet Union base camp Bellingshausen on King George Island. I thought this would be easy. This took 8 years of my life, over 10 million US dollars that I had to raise, but it was worth it. And gradually we pulled all this together, managed to get a yacht sponsored called 2041 that would become our kind of flagship for the expedition, a kind of communications center. People would say, why is she called 2041? And we could tell them. After 8 years, we took down an old ship. And please, when you're watching this story, everybody, just understand that we have a team of 4 people who do all this. 4 people. And we get the right people to come in to do the right job. We have a very small, tight team of incredible people. Took down this ship, loaded it up by hand. That took 4 months. And I'm very proud to tell you that I went to go and see my mum yesterday. My mother is turning 106. I repeat, 106 next month. And she sends you all lots and lots of love today. I saw her yesterday, in fact, this morning in her home, and she inspired me as a young man to take on looking after our world, not because it was cool. She taught me about recycling before it was on a box in the corner of an office. She inspired me to make sure that we recycled all of this twisted metal, took it back to Uruguay, South America, a job done. And this had taken 8 years. And on this day, and if you're all on the front line of this, I don't need to say to you all, hey, we've got a few problems with the planet, we need to step it up. That's not what I'm here to tell you. You know we need to step it up. You are stepping it up. But I think it's important for us all in this battle for our survival as a species on this planet, that we remember to be relevant. And often it's very easy to think you're being relevant, and one day you find out you're not being relevant. So I realized on this day that being a rubbish collector, collecting garbage from the Antarctic was great, but it wouldn't help preserve Antarctica. So I changed the game. I realized that if we went to Antarctica to exploit it, why would we go there? For fossil fuels, for energy. So being a bit slow, I said, well, hang on a minute. Maybe if we use more renewable energy in the real world, no one's going to go and exploit Antarctica because it won't make financial sense. So after this wonderful day, we took up being renewable energy champions, because if we are using more renewable energy, no one's going to go and exploit Antarctica. So we started a voyage with our fantastic yacht around the world, representing the United Nations. This was an endless, massive battle around the world with our yacht to show people what we were doing. And remember, the first World Summit was in 1992, and the second World Summit would be in South Africa in 2002. So being us, we thought, let's go there in style. Let's go and create a bit of a fuss. Let's get a bit of PR. And we worked with an amazing group of people in South Africa, all about AIDS. And I think that's a good lesson about being relevant. Young people in South Africa are more interested in not dying of AIDS than helping preserve Antarctica. So we took our yacht out of the water, she'd come from Antarctica, onto a giant trailer, and we made the longest overland voyage ever made in history around the whole of Southern Africa, and visited well over 1.5 million young people in person who've never seen a boat, never seen photographs of Antarctica, and getting messages across about looking after themselves, but also planting a seed that Antarctica is worth preserving. And we arrived at the second World Summit in Johannesburg with our yacht. Anybody from South Africa will know that not many yachts have ever been to Johannesburg. It's landlocked. And there we met, had a huge team. We met all kinds of leaders. And being me, I said, oh, okay, well, we'll see you at the next World Summit. Perhaps a bit of a mistake on my behalf. Immediately, we put the yacht back in the water in Cape Town, beautiful port, and we made a circumnavigation of the whole of Africa. Because on the issue of AIDS, on those issues, you know, you can't just drop those issues. You've got to be pushing it forward. So we made a voyage around the whole of Africa, where my young people's team and myself could speak to young people about their issues. We planted millions of trees around Africa. We cleaned up beaches. And these 3 young men became the first ever Africans to circumnavigate the whole of Africa, and they're doing a fantastic job with their story now on sustainability in Southern Africa. The voyage would continue from a bridge that I live very near in the United States of America. At the moment, I'm speaking to you from the United Kingdom, and this voyage would go around the world, showing young people how renewable energy works. We had solar panel sails made of recycled plastic bottles. Again, that idea to inspire people, show them solutions, don't talk about them. And we would test out different fuels in our engine. This was a huge voyage, 200,000 nautical miles around the world in our yacht. Very, very proud of it. And we were told by the United Nations that the third World Summit, after the first one in Rio in 1992 and the second one in Southern Africa in 2002, that the third one in 2012 would be in Singapore. And this kind of made sense, you know, the Americas, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and then Asia. So our whole voyage was towards the world leaders getting together in Singapore in 2012. But then, just as we were closing in on Singapore, we were told, sorry, we're having the third World Summit back in Rio. Only 109 days of sailing from Singapore to get back. But again, if you make a commitment, it's not a bad idea to deliver on it. So we had a huge battle to get that yacht through endless storms, going round the famous Cape of Storms off the bottom of Africa. And yes, we got there to Rio de Janeiro, I think 3 days before the third World Summit was due to take place. A lot of world leaders didn't bother to go, but we were proud to be there because we said we were going to be there. And it was a very interesting time to see how things had changed over 20 years. It was interesting to celebrate things which no one ever talks about, you know. I walked under a hole in the ozone, had my eyes burnt out, face fried off, but guess what? It's taken 30 years, but NASA told us very recently that the hole in the ozone is starting to heal itself because we did the right thing in 1987 with the Montreal Protocol. We can do these things, and we need to promote what's possible to achieve rather than always going on about things you can't achieve. So every year we go to the Antarctic. So we have the renewable energy side, but also I like to create champions for Antarctica and also give people skills to become better leaders in what they're doing. So we have, I don't know whether you can see those numbers at the top, but we've taken a lot of people to Antarctica, 83 nations, and I might say more women than men because more women apply. My mother always taught me something, by the way, that women have the power, and she's right. And in Antarctica, we have had just the most unbelievable people come, often women representing their countries for the first time before men. And we've had over 80 fantastic women from the Middle East coming to Antarctica. We've had hundreds of great young leaders, maybe old leaders like myself, coming from India. We forget that India has 1.4 billion people. And 900 million of those people want everything that we have. And they have every right to have it. So we must work with India to make sure they get it in a better way than we still get it. Do a lot of work with China. Those two great nations, India and China, will be hugely important to the preservation of the Antarctic. And whether people in the United States or my country, the UK, like it or not, India and China are the next great empire on Earth, that's for sure. What we see in Antarctica is frightening because I go every year and I see more and more ice piling off this continent into the ocean. We've built these education stations all over the world that run only on renewable energy. No one's at them, but these little buildings all over the world run only on renewable energy, even in the cold of Antarctica. And, you know, that relevant word, sometimes being relevant is painful in life. So 2011, I spent 3 years on a bicycle going around India, which I might say is more dangerous than walking to the South or North Poles. But why did I go around India on a bicycle? Because it would have been not relevant to young people there had I got out of a limousine wearing a white suit. They won't forget an Englishman very red in the face arriving at their school, college or university to give a talk after bicycling thousands of miles to get there. Be relevant, it counts. And in India, went up right to the top of the Ganges River, famous place, Gomukh, which is the source of that river that only provides 400 million people with water. And that glacier behind me in that photograph actually is melting almost at walking speed. Ever been thirsty? I hope not. And in India, we've built education stations for local young people and teachers to go, all running on renewable energy. And every year we go high into the Himalayas. I think for many people listening, maybe they've possibly not, at least for a while, experienced a world with no electricity. Well, we go up into the high in the Himalayas and take solar grids to fire up people's villages, or in this case, a monastery with electric light. This guy could see what he was doing for the first time in 2,000 years. And this young man in the village certainly didn't like me much because he had to do homework now after 6 o'clock at night. All that we do is very small, but lots of small things together can make a huge difference. About 4 years ago, I was pulled into to NASA. I really respect NASA. And they said, Rob, huge areas of Antarctica, that area at the bottom is the size of France, are now starting to melt. And we didn't expect this. And my son and I came away from this meeting with NASA and we had a pretty good conversation. My son Barney is 27 years of age. He was 23, I think, at this stage. And he said, Dad, you know, ice that floats on the surface, if it melts, it doesn't matter, it doesn't raise the sea level. But ice that comes off land does raise sea level. So he said it may not matter to people in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, London, maybe even Bombay, because people can build walls. But I happen to know this family in the Maldives, and they had to move house, and they'd never done anything to deserve having to move house. So my son and I came away and he said, look, Dad, pretty simple. You carry on with your mission to preserve Antarctica. I said, we will. But he said, look, and I'm sure some of you listening feel like this. He said, Dad, my generation are really angry with the world that you and your generation and the generations before have left us. We're angry. And I said, yeah, I've noticed. And he said, but if there's one thing I've realized in life, Dad, is that being angry doesn't get you anywhere. So he said, I would like to get a challenge going, especially for young people, that's focused on easy, convenient solutions. So while people are angry and pointing fingers at governments and pointing fingers at industry and business, they can also be affecting solutions. We don't have time to be just angry. We've got to link solutions and being frustrated together here and now. So I would carry on preserving the Antarctic, and Barney, my son, would take on the Climate Force Challenge. And I thought, this sounds great. But he said, Dad, there's one thing, bit of a catch here. I'm sick of being Robert Swan, who walked to the South and North Pole's son. I'd like to have my own story. So will you please walk to the South Pole with me? And I said, no, I've done all that. And he said, what happens if we run this expedition only on renewable energy? It's never been done, Dad. And I said, okay, I'm in. And working with NASA, imagine if you don't have water at -40, you're going to end up dying of dehydration. So working with NASA, we developed these incredible ice melting machines. One day they'll use these on Mars, because the first people who go to Mars won't be astronauts. They'll send people like me, because they won't come back. And they'll have to survive on Mars, melting the ice that's on Mars to stay alive. So off we went, my son and I and 2 companions to the South Pole. This was great, because young people listening, more senior people listening, you know, we can't afford to be working separately. Young people, older people, they have to work together. In a crisis, in a survival situation, you work together to stay alive. So it was great to be with my son side by side. Off we went. But after 300 miles, I have a problem. My hip disintegrates. I can't move. I can't walk. And for the first time in my polar career, I have to fail. This wasn't easy. Leaving my son to carry on. Brave Barney at 23, he would carry on to the pole with his 2 companions, another 300 miles. He lost part of his toe in doing this, but he was willing to suck it up. And I flew in to celebrate his moment. Nothing to do with me. First ever expedition to any pole, surviving only on renewable energy. And for any more senior people listening, we really do have to hand over the baton to young people. We can't hold on to it. It's time to give that responsibility and empower young people with great stories. So well done, Barney and the team, job done. And what Barney's doing now, he's in the rainforest, the oldest rainforest in the world, in far north Queensland, top end of Australia there. And he is taking this piece of land, about 1,000 acres, and it was hacked down. No one ever asked questions then. Hacked down to grow bananas about 50 years ago, but the bananas never grew. And Barney's replanting this with trees that will grow and live for 2,000 years. You know, there was rainforest in this picture when there were trees in Antarctica. Think about that. So Barney's on it. He's doing some great stuff. Please have a look at his climateforce.org website. He's really going for it. But anybody knows me, I wasn't going to leave those 300 miles, had a brand new hip put in, end of 2019, beginning of 2020. I went back to exactly where I'd failed with Barney and had to come out. Got the most incredible 2 people to lead me, Johanna and Katinka from Norway, the best polar travelers in the world. They would be in charge, joined by Kyle, our incredible cameraman from Norway, and off we went. I was testing out different types of fuel. Wait for it. I had fuel to melt ice and snow made from CO2 from our atmosphere. So we put the dirt up. This incredible company in Switzerland called Climeworks takes it out of the air and made me fuel. Anything's possible if you believe in it. So off we go. This was great. I felt so strong. I was so well led by Johanna and Katinka. I actually enjoyed it. I'd never enjoyed one day of this ever before. And 97 miles out from the pole, after so many miles, I lose my discipline. I thought, hey, we're there. Started thinking about going home. Made a huge mistake, went out of the tent, fell over, and my brand new hip blew out of its socket, and I was left lying in the snow crying. This was not the best day of my life. Only 97 miles after all those miles over so many years. Went to the pole by plane, shortest flight of my life. Came back home, thought I could rebuild everything, and COVID happened the next week. And I have to say, I hope it's not a bad thing, I felt rather sorry for myself, really. And I thought, no, I can't do this. Better pick myself up, had some extra nuts and bolts put in my hip, And at the end of next year, sorry, I've got the dates wrong there, but at end of 2022, beginning of 2023, I'm going back to finish those 97 miles to the pole, but I'm not going to do it on my own. And I've got some incredible wounded veterans, women and men, different colors, races, creeds from all over the world who are going to come with me. And I think they have a terrific story. And I just ask you all to imagine having served your nation in somewhere like Afghanistan, lost a leg, and right now thinking, well, what was the point in losing my leg? They're going through a difficult time. They've got a great story. And these women and men can stand at the pole with me. And my message to the world, National Geographic are making a film of this. My message to the world will be, these people lost limbs in war, and war will never darken the doors of the Antarctic continent. And why not have veterans for the planet? We need all hands to the pumps. And over the next 10 years, we're going into the ocean and we're going to make sure we protect 2041. I'm ready to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, thank you very, very much for extraordinary presentation. So the first question is going to be with Ariel Granite. Ariel?
The question that we have are from a student named Ksenia. And it was, what were your thoughts when you had your trips across Antarctica? And did you think that if you had gone alone, would you be able to do it, or would you have needed a companion?
I think that Antarctica is, a few friends of mine have made journeys in Antarctica on their own, and it's a very hard thing to do anywhere. But in Antarctica, I have known people that have survived, but I certainly would not go alone to the South Pole because all of it's white. Everything's white, and you never see color, you never see anything. So it's very hard up in your head dealing with that. Maybe other people could do it, but I certainly couldn't handle going on my own to the South Pole. I think I would lose my mind, actually.
Thank you, Ariel. And Jessica, would you like to continue with the other questions?
Yes, Dr. Durback. Mr. Swan, thank you for a very inspiring presentation and for your work. Our next question is from Helen. In your opinion, what 3 actions contribute to global warming, and how does it threaten Antarctica in the next 3 years?
Well, I think that climate change is really the word. And obviously climate change is about our world in some places warming up, in other places it possibly will cool down a bit. But I think that Antarctica is merely just, maybe you know the analogy, it's like the canary in the mine. In the old days when people were mining, they would have little canaries in the mine, and if the canary looked a bit ill, then they knew the air was getting bad. So Antarctica really is the canary in the mine. It's telling us, and I think that the actions that people need to take are to think about what they're doing. It's very easy in our world to sort of say, well, you know, it's all too big, the issue's too much. I think that people can look and lead others by what they're doing themselves. And I think that's a really important thing. And maybe the question's coming from a younger person, I don't know, but it's a question of, as my son Barney's trying to do, is to say, look, you can actually do things really easily. And it's not some big deal, just make it a habit. So for example, most people pay utility bill. We all have to pay for our electricity and gas and water and stuff. But you can ring up your utility, especially in the United States or in Europe, and you can ask them for green electricity. And that electricity won't come from the roof of your house. It will come from a wind farm or a solar farm, perhaps thousands of miles away. But by law, they have to give you that. So gradually, more people who ask, the more that expands the amount of renewable energy that's around. So, not only will that save Antarctica, it may even save, our situation with climate change on Earth. So there are lots of things you can do. And I ask you to look at climateforce.org, my son Barney's site, and you'll have some good ideas there. But simple, easy, convenient solutions, press of a mouse, job done. I think people often feel it's all too much, or break through that and do small things and inspire other people to do small things. And if there's anything from the story that you've just heard, lots of small things together can make, hopefully, a little bit of difference.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mapta. Should Antarctic tourism be banned?
That's a very, very good question. It's a question I struggle with daily. Thank you for that question, because in theory, if you want to save Antarctica, you shouldn't go there. That's a very, very valid point. But I think there are two things that I still wrestle with this, by the way. There's two things. One is I say to myself, well, Antarctica is very expensive to go to. So no one goes there for a sort of weekend break, right? It costs a lot of money to go there. It's a long way away from the real world. So that in a way reduces the amount of people that can go. And I think that sort of protects it to a certain extent. And secondly, that when people do go to Antarctica, there are some very strict guidelines on their impact that they can have. I mean, it's really very seriously, it's taken very, very seriously. So I feel that when we do go there, people are following some pretty strict guidelines, and anybody who's on my expedition has to follow those guidelines to the letter. But lastly, I think what's really important, and Ariel, who asked that question, she's joining us next March. And I think what I know is that if somebody's lucky enough to go to Antarctica, then they will come back as a champion to help preserve the last great wilderness left on Earth. And that, for me, outweighs any impact they may have in going. It's a difficult one. It's a very good question. But my biggest fear with Antarctica is that unless people know about it, and if we had a little poll now amongst the 40 odd people that are listening, possibly people even like yourselves who are really in on all these things, maybe some of you didn't know about 2041. So I think it's really important that people know about it, and in lots of different nations around the world, because this won't be a decision just taken by some rich countries. All countries should have this on their agenda. I'm fingers crossed that United Nations also can help make sure in 2041 that we preserve Antarctica. And I think that it's important that people can't, as happens so often in our world, that a bunch of people get behind closed doors and start to make decisions about Antarctica that then can't be reversed. So my job is to keep this issue above the radar. And right now, I may change my view. Right now, I feel it's okay to take a very select small team there every year to create champions. Jolly good question. I'm still battling with it.
I can understand
Okay,
that.
our
Jessica?
next question. Our next question is from Irina. Yes.
Thanks, Jessica.
Irina asks, do you think you will accomplish your 4041 mission left to you from Cousteau? And if so, what would be the next specific steps that we need to undertake as humankind to preserve Antarctica and other parts of the world that are in danger of disappearing?
I think that, I'm pretty much focused on Antarctica, and that's something Jacques Cousteau made very clear to me as a young man. He said, Rob, stick with what you do. try to start doing all kinds of other things. And Jacques Cousteau, was a man of the ocean. He stuck to that very carefully. So I'm sticking to Antarctica. I can't speak for other places so much, but I think with Antarctica, that's going to be the campaign over the next 15, 20 years from now, is to keep raising with as many people as I possibly can, and using today's technology, that people, at least at the very worst, it's on their radar. And I think that if I can, and we can, all of us, put that on people's radar, why do politicians make decisions? Normally they make decisions because they hope it's popular. So I think the biggest thing I can do is to make sure, as we move towards 2041, that politicians are thinking, hang on a minute, this is a very popular issue. We better actually get behind doing it. And because no one owns it, then who can have it? And if it's not financially worth going there, then maybe those two things put together will actually do the job. I have a huge amount of hope that we can do it. Otherwise, I would lose faith, but I have every hope that we can achieve this mission.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, you mentioned that your education stations and your son's trek to Antarctica relied on renewable energy. What renewable energy can you use down in the Antarctic, and what renewable energies do you think we should be championing to save Antarctica?
Well, I think it's two things, it's save ourselves as well. So for years and years and years, I was just focused on making sure we use more renewable energy in order to save Antarctica. But, where I live in California, the fires literally were closing in on my house as I left to come to the UK yesterday morning. And I think that things are closing in much more on us. And I think that what we have to do long term and short term is to say, okay, what can we do? And obviously a lot of people listening can't suddenly put solar panels on the roof of their house. They maybe haven't got a house. I don't have one. It's not mine. I rent it. I'm trying to persuade the guy who owns it to put them on, but work in progress. So I think what all of us can do is to say, hey, whatever chance we have, even if it's, how many people spend most of their life running around trying to charge their phone? Well, how about charging it off a small solar panel? And that possibly on its own won't make a huge amount of difference. But the more people do that, the cheaper that solar does become. So I think that all of us, if we can save energy, can, actually say to ourselves, well, what can we do with renewables? And as I said, bring up your utility and say, hey, I want to have green energy. It might only cost you, $2 extra a week to have that green energy. But I think it's a question of being persistent and not backing down and doing it.
Thank you. Our next question is from Anastasia. What is the secret of your fearlessness?
God, I would say that the secret of my fearlessness is that I'm frightened. That's the honest truth, that I'm not some stiff upper lip Englishman sort of saying, come on, chaps, everything will be all right. I'm not that sort of human being. I've realized that survival isn't about being tough. Survival is about being sensitive, caring. It's about possibly loving. Those are words that people possibly wouldn't imagine that I employ to stay alive. But I think admitting that you're frightened, which I do, and I am, I'm terrified to go back to the South Pole at the end of next year at 97 miles, it terrifies me. But I think by admitting that you're frightened, actually in a way, allows you to have some less fear. It's a weird thing, but I hope everybody listening understands that. It's admitting it and embracing being frightened, and then kind of moving from there forwards.
Thank you. Our next question is, it is said that Antarctica has noticeably turned green because the number of microalgae has increased. Did you notice a change of color in the snow?
Yeah, I mean, everything that happens in Antarctica, where you see a lot of difference, is on the shore of Antarctica. And that's where all the wildlife are. There's no, once you go a mile inshore from the edge of Antarctica, there's nothing. It's dead, and it wants you dead. But on the shore, there's a lot more going on. And I have noticed it looks often like Antarctica's crying, or somebody stabbed Antarctica, because not only do you get green areas of algae, you get red. And a lot of this you see more of, not because that's happening more, but the snow and the stuff that used to cover that has gone. And, you know, I go there so often that it's a bit like anybody who's listening, when you go back home tonight or going back somewhere that you know really well, and you sort of go like, what? You know, that street is missing half of the street. Where did it go? Or there used to be a garden there or some trees there, and it's all gone. And more you go there, the more you see huge change, in the ice scape. I mean, last year I saw an island that I'd never seen before, because the ice that used to be over that island had gone. And, you know, I think with Antarctica, you know, we've still got time, but we do need to make those changes, all of us, and keep pushing at it. Or once it starts to melt, as I said, once you start to melt and have ice that comes from land and that goes into the sea, that's when you get sea level rise. Now, I'm aware that we're kind of 2 minutes out now from the end of the program.
Don't worry, you can always have another 5 minutes. I can add that. I will take it from the beginning. Okay. So let's continue with the questions. Jessica?
Yes, the next question is from Ledenko. I was very shocked to know that the eyes are able to change their color due to influence on ultraviolet radiation. Can north or south poles provoke any other unusual effects on the body or even the mind?
Well, yeah, they can. The effects of ultraviolet rays, what you've got to understand is, you know, when we walked to the poles, there weren't any sort of fancy Oakley goggles and sort of amazing dark glasses. They were not very good all those years ago. So the ultraviolet rays would come through the hole in the ozone layer, hit the ice, bounce back, and literally fry us from below as we were walking. I think that possibly the biggest effect, which is a positive one, is that when you walk to the poles, it puts things in perspective quite clearly, actually, that you know, we do live on this, because you've literally gone to the top of the world and then the next time you're hanging off the bottom. It makes you really think how lonely we are in the universe. And I have great friends in NASA who said, Rob, there's nothing out there for a really long way. So we're on our own, this tiny little blue dot. And going to the poles sort of reinforces that feeling of how alone we are in the universe, and how vulnerable we are at the same time. But at the same time, you're going through the most beautiful landscapes. They might be a bit tough, but they're pretty beautiful places. So it sort of inspires you to really want to make sure that we do more to preserve what we have. And also what it does is when you go to the places I go, you just know that we're nothing, and that our planet is perfectly capable of kicking us all off, which it is actually in the process of doing, whether we like it or not. And how powerful it is, and how mean it can be, and how hard it can be. So walking to the poles kind of inspires you, but also frightens you at the same time, and makes you feel quite vulnerable when you've been out literally to the ends of the earth.
Fascinating, thank you. Dr. Derbeck, would you like to continue with one more question?
Yes, I have a question from one of the students. It is a breathtaking presentation. How is climate change affecting the ocean?
Well, I think that the best person that could ever speak about that is Dr. Sylvia Earle, who is a great, fantastic pioneer. I'm proud to call her a friend. I think that what's happening with the ocean is there's definitely a warming of the ocean. And what that does to Antarctica, which is, there's a very landmark glacier called the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica, which is enormous. And what's happening is that this warmer ocean, even if it's just warmer by a degree or so, is going underneath that giant glacier and melting underneath, and huge areas of that could well break off. Some big areas already have. So I feel that the ocean is, as Jacques Cousteau said to me, which, being a bit stupid in English, I'd never thought of. He said, Rob, we don't live on planet Earth. We live on planet ocean. I went, yeah, actually, you're right. And if we mess with the ocean, it'll mess with us. And I think that we are in the process of not only putting too much plastic in the ocean, but we are dangerously warming it up. And give you an example, at the North Pole, is that the white of the snow and ice that used to be at the North Pole is gone. And as we all know, white reflects light and heat. And if the ocean's now dark and black, then what does that do? It absorbs heat. So there's lots and lots of things going on with the ocean that we need to be very much aware of. But I really want to end this session, everybody, by just saying, look, it's my honor to speak to you all. I'm proud to have done my best in a small way to work with the United Nations. And I just feel that all of you need to go away from this feeling, hey, if that guy can do all the stuff he's done, we've got it. We've got this. You have. And remember, when I first started talking about this 30 years ago, probably like the good doctor, people thought, what's wrong with these people? But, you've got such an opportunity ahead of you. And I just ask you to dig in, find more and more inspiring ways of engaging people, not on awareness. We don't have time for awareness. It's got to be action, solutions. And I wish you all the very, very best of luck. Please don't go away from this thinking, oh, well, the ice is melting. It's all a waste of time. No, it's not. As a survivor, that you just keep trying, and eventually you'll come through. You don't give up. So I wish you all the very, very best of luck to everybody listening. And if you ever want to come to Antarctica, join Ariel, and got a great team going in next March. Please get onto our website. Robert@robertswan.com is my email. Robert@robertswan.com. And if anybody's got any other questions they'd like to ask, you know, drop me a line. Can't say I'll reply in 2 minutes, but you know, there's no point doing these things and everybody presses leave, you know, on Zoom, leave meeting. Well, the meeting's only just begun. So I wish you all the best of luck. It's been really good fun. Doctor, thanks so much for hosting all of this. Jessica, Ariel, rest of the team. It's been my honor. So I wish you all the best of luck.
Well, thank you very, very much for your words of wisdom and advice. And we are very grateful for your dedication and stamina to achieve your goal. And we wish you the best of luck in your continuing voyages and your conquering of fearlessness. Very, very good advice. Bye-bye.